Schedule. I'd like to call you all set? Okay. I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, January 10th, 2018 meeting of the Hannaford Regional Technical School District. I'll lead off with board introductions. Would you like to start?
Lorraine Morris, representing the ACSD.
Nick Colston, representing ACSD.
Len Schmidt, and Clark Pearson. Gibson Smith, Focus Manager, in Pearson.
Linda Barrett, clerk.
Dana Peterson, Director Superintendent.
Jason LaRock, Workforce Investment Board.
Mark Perrin, Workforce Investment Board.
Alyssa Beckwith, Workforce Investment Board.
Kim Farnham, New Haven, my name's Community at Large Member.
Kelly Mills, Assistant Director of Human Students.
Okay. We have some minor changes to the agenda. First of all, I'd like to add at the beginning of the action agenda, we've just received a letter pertaining to a resignation of staff that we need to take action on. So we'll do that as the first item in our action agenda. And I would like to add an executive session that I'm not anticipating any action out of at the end of the meeting for personnel. And I'd like to block out 10 minutes for that. So. Does anyone have any other items they'd like to adjust on the agenda? All right. Hearing none, I take a motion to approve the agenda as revised.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right. Hearing none. All those in favor of the revised agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Thank you. The agenda has been approved. Next item would be visitor correspondence. I don't believe or visitor comments. I don't believe we have any today. Everyone's here for he's here for the auditor's presentation. All right. Do we have any other correspondence that we'd like to bring?
No other correspondence this evening, Jason.
I mentioned the letter. We're not going to deal with that, and correspondence will deal with that as part of that action item. Our consent agenda this evening consists of the meeting minutes from December 13th, 2017, and the monthly accounts payable for January. Do we have the numbers for January?
Gretchen's been out sick, so there are no numbers this month.
Okay.
So will we review those next month? We'll do 2 months.
Or earlier, I don't know. We'll figure that one out. Hopefully by next month.
All right. Would anyone like to remove either of those items for further conversation? All right. Hearing none, the consent agenda is passed. Moves us into our action agenda. Our first item that's been newly added to the agenda is acting on a letter of resignation from a staff or faculty member. I'm going to turn it over to Dana to read the letter to us, and then we'll take action.
January 10th, 2018, to the ART Advisory, Dana Peterson, and PAHCC School Board. It is with a grateful heart that I tender this letter of resignation. It has been an exciting and fruitful experience to have had the role of Addison Repertory Theater Program Director for these past 24 years. From the fledgling ART Performance Program in 1994-95 through the startup of ART Tech in 1996, and on into the years in the Black Box Theater ART, what Theater ART now calls home. ART has provided avenues out of pathways for many young artists. Over the years, I have thoroughly enjoyed working with students, parents, colleagues, and colleagues alike. I have been privy to young people giddy with excitement as ART students perform children's theater at the region elementary schools. I have witnessed time and again how ART students have struggled with and succeeded with only an idea and blank piece of paper to create wonderful plays in our series of 10-minute one-acts. Students have entered the ART shop with little knowledge of tool use, with raw materials of wood, paint, steel, cloth, and have successfully created full-scale sets and complete wardrobes for main stage presentations. Years ago, a UD3 board member responded to the idea of English in the Career Center jokingly by asking, "Are they learning the King's English?" Yes, we have watched students of all levels, learning styles, and levels of performance perform Shakespeare. All of this has been wonderful year after year, but this is a career center, and we at ART have been focused on the individual being prepared for a career. Since the start of the ART Tech program, we have helped 100% of our students who desire find placement in college, and the same success rate at 100% for our actors since 2000. And that wonderful feeling is sustained when I see their work and hear of their experiences around the world. As I think about leaving, I am filled with gratitude. First, that I had the honor of working with my originating partner, Candace Burkle, without whom the program would have fizzled out many times over. Secondly, to my family for putting up with the late nights and emotional highs and lows that came with the job. Thirdly, the students and their dedication, willingness to try, to persevere, and to enjoy. And to the Career Center community and the community at large for their support and encouragement. I look forward to meeting with you to discuss next steps towards my leaving. Thank you. Steve Small.
Move to accept a resignation.
Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
When is that effective?
The end of this school year. So,
I would need clarification,
yeah.
but I'm assuming that that's the case.
All right.
So if you want to make that a condition of the acceptance, that the clarification be the end of the school year.
No, let's, since we don't know the circumstances, but, so, well, this was, just so everyone is clear, this is fresh to both of us. You know,
Minutes before the.
yeah. I was told as I walked in the door, so.
Is there a contract reason for having to approve that tonight? I mean, is there, in terms of when a faculty member resigns as part of the master agreement?
I don't know, and actually that was gonna be my question for you. Being that you negotiated that agreement, that last agreement, I'm presuming that the timing of this is in accordance with the master agreement. And I, to me, a resignation's a resignation. We're acting on it because it's it's one of those things they say we need to do, but we don't. So.
Normally, if someone is not going to return with to fulfill a contract for the following year, the letter is just accepted as a appreciation notification that we have the advance time to do it in planning. So.
But we don't know that because we don't have an official date, right?
We don't have.
I was assuming that it would be the end of the year, but I am a bit at a loss because I wasn't able to clarify not having it.
And regardless, this gives him, the superintendent, the leeway to work out whatever needs to happen.
You can always come back if there's some kind of change.
Yep. So we're going on the presumption that this is, he'll be done at the end of the school year.
Okay.
Any further discussions, concerns, questions?
Is there a second to that?
There was a second.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
All right, all those in favor of accepting the resignation of Mr. Steve Small signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay, motion is accepted.
Thank you.
Policy 2.3, financial conditions and activities. You'll see that there's 2.3. items on our agenda. This is the first one, which is the quarterly monitoring report that the superintendent provides. There's a copy of that in your packet. We'll address that, and then we will address the second one immediately following. I turn it over to Dana. There's a copy of, before I do that, there's a copy of that report in your packet. So, and on the website. Yours, Dana.
People need a minute, or? Gibson prepares the financial monitoring report at mid-year, which focuses on where we are in the process. And as noted in number 2, the total amount of credit at $800,000 has been extended for the first part of the year, and that has been paid back in full. Is that correct, Gibson?
Yes, it is.
There's on the long-term reserves, we have a building equipment and reserve fund. The based on the town meeting of last year, where the voters approved a transfer of $107,168 of the unreserved surplus to the birth fund. That transfer will be happening later this month. Payrolls have been happening in a timely manner. A note that we have transitioned from having a payroll service, do our payroll data to in-house. That was a recommendation from the auditors, and we have successfully, pretty much, Gibson, transferred that to in-house operations. On number 7, we have the capital expenses from the Building and Reserve Fund in excess of $5,000. There were 3. And all of those had been pre-approved both by the Facilities Committee as well as the board for the projects that required acceptance of bids. Any questions?
Move to accept the report as presented by the superintendent.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay, the motion is carried. Thank you. Next item on our agenda would be Policy 2.3, Financial Conditions and Activities. This is an external monitoring report, and the FY 2017 external audit. So I'm going to turn it over to Dana, and I'm sure he'll turn it over to Gibson.
Thank you, Jason. I will turn it over to Gibson, who can introduce our guest and make any comments that he has about our auditing process. You might want to start with the transition that we had this year, the auditor.
That's right. As we discussed earlier this year, our former auditors, Angolano, resigned, and we were unable to perform this year's audit, so we were in a position to seek a new auditor. And we're happy to announce that we've taken on R. Smith, and so we've got Ron Smith here on your behalf. And so far so good. We're having a good experience working with them. But I'll invite you to.
This is awfully comfortable over here with these.
So wherever you feel comfortable.
I'll be wherever you want me to be.
Why don't you sit right next to Gibson and then you can. While Ron's coming around, I had reported in one of my previous board reports that we had already started to put into place some of the recommendations that Ron and his company had made. It was really a pleasure working with them. Very easy and helpful in terms of the transition. And for me, it was really good to have such an experienced team work with us as I was making the transition to the superintendent. So I'd like to thank Ron and his entire team for their professionalism and their attention to our needs and the help that they provided for us. So thank you, Ron. Thanks, Gibson.
I'm Ron Smith. I'm the principal with RHR Smith and Company. Born and raised in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. So building a house in Barnet, Vermont. All we do is governmental and nonprofit at our company. I work with 30 other professionals. In the state of Vermont, I believe we do well over 200 school systems, including 2 of the 3 career centers that are independent. And we're glad that we were able to have the opportunity to do business with you this year. So I believe sometimes our journey started with you guys back in like September during our field work, and I can honestly say that Dana, Gibson, you know, they were very, very welcoming and embracing, you know, of us, you know, to the point where I think it was easy for us to sit down and give them all advice, you know, on who you are and how you do business. We certainly know a lot about who you are. It's more importantly, I think what we try to do is understand, because we don't sit in your chairs, on how to do business. In front of you, Gibson's passed out some of the selected pages of the financial statements. And I think if you read this, it will do nothing more than confirm what your management's been telling you, where you were going to end your year on June 30, 2017. And these are the 3 probably the most important pages of the document. I'm going to start with page 1 on Statement C. And if you look in general fund, that's your school budget that was warned and passed out there amongst the public. And to simply say that you had ownership of assets of 360, I'm in the first column there where the numbers start. You had ownership of assets of $360,000 against liabilities, $316,000 against liabilities of almost 100, leaves you with equity or fund balance or carryover balance of about $222,000 as of June 30, 2017. Where do we like to see you? Our standards say that we like to see you 30, 60 to 90 days of your operating budget. There's really not a statute that applies to the career centers, but they do for school systems in the state of Vermont. And what usually traditionally happens with the school systems is that they'll either use the money to offset taxes in a future budget, or they'll use it to transfer into certain reserve accounts like capital to maintain the infrastructure of the school. Some are starting to do special ed reserves now, maintenance reserves. I mean, there's a variety of things that, you know, through the public process you can transfer to. But if you based it on just sheerly your general fund budget of about $3.5 billion, that would require you guys to have about $320,000 of surplus to be kind of, I won't say comfortable, but be at the bottom, you know, of where our standards would want you. You're at about a little over $208,000, so I'd say that you're probably not at 30 days, you're more at 20 days. So you're pretty lean and mean. If that phone rings and there's a price tag attached to it, you really don't have a lot of resources here to go to, you know, to alleviate, you know, something that you didn't anticipate in your budget when you passed it. You know, so that's something that I think that we talk a lot with management about. And for people to think that the Career Center is just flush with cash, that's just not the case here. You know, it's just not. You run a tight budget. You know, you have very limited resources on running that tight budget. You know, and clearly when I look at this product, you know, I see that. You've had some generous benefactors. You know, the Rogers family was very kind. We actually do the neighboring school system right across the parkway. That family was a very kind family, you know, to this area for sure. And they were kind to the Career Center as well. But as far as your operating budget and the money that you have left over to maintain and continue that going, you know, into the future, you're tight. You're tight. There's not a lot of resources there. The good news is you got about $137,000 sitting in a reserve fund. And remember, this is as of a point in time, June 30, 17. And I understand that post June 30, 17, you've moved more money, into that reserve fund. And I think that that's very prudent of you to do, to do exactly that. So, that's really the story, as far as, if somebody said, Ron, what's the most important thing that you take away? We're healthy. We're certainly not too healthy, and you have very limited resources to run a $3.5 million important part, of this education, this system, in this area here. And the next 2 pages are clearly what you expected to take in against what you expected to spend during the course of the year, and how that played out in the course of its budget. And I understand that there's, been a lot of talk about that, this year, but very clearly, I think it's exactly where you expected to be, and what your management's been telling you that you expected to be on June 30th, 2017. And there's really nothing there that's glaring at me, that would say, boy, we had some issues. You understood that there's some departments there that were certainly gonna be overspent. It certainly wasn't drastic. You had the money, you knew that. And I think that your management understands, who they are and what they are, and they deliver good, accurate financial information to you. And that's really what the next two pages say. It gives you pretty much a summary and a breakdown, of who you are and again, what you do. We also, and I believe that you were provided some, we call it our best management letter, is what it's referred to in the profession, but a best practice letter is what I refer to it as. There's some comments and some observations that we made while we were here during the audit, some best practices. We don't sit in your chair, but we certainly try, to get there so that we can give you some advice. And we made about 7 or 8 comments, and I know at least 3 of them were acted quickly upon by your management. But there are some best practices here, and that's one thing about getting new auditors. Certainly they take we certainly are no exception, but we took a fresh look at who you are and what you are. We looked at your bylaws, we looked at certain things like that, and one of the things is, we brought to your guys' attention, is that you're supposed to have a separate audit for full-time equivalents, by your bylaws. And I asked, and in having conversations with Gibson and Dana, whether or not they were aware, of that. And that's something I know that they're paying close attention to expand the scope of that audit next year. And I believe that's actually required by state statute too. So, other things that we talked about, policy and procedure, how you approve third-party contracts and who can approve third-party contracts. I know that one was addressed fairly immediately during the whole process, and there was a lot of conversation about that. There's a lot of conversation on whether or not, and I believe that was addressed subsequently, whether or not Dana even was given the authority by this board, for his position to be the chief administrative officer to enter into those contracts. And I know that was subsequently discussed, with you all as well. Here was probably the one that we spent the most attention to, and that's with your books. There's things that you see in the course of your business, and I heard you talking about warrants here tonight and approving the AP warrants. And one of the concerns, that we have, is the fact that there's some things you don't see. There's thousands of dollars in these enterprise funds with the students, and the money in the vocation center that you're not seeing on that warrant. And not only not seeing on the warrant, they're not on your books. And I think a lot of the conversation that we had is you really should, whoever you are, should be able to tell your story. And when you pick up, your internal financial statements, they ought to tell the whole story. And right now, you tell a good story about who you are and what you are in your general fund, but as far as all the other pieces of your business, there's some that aren't being told in that story. And one of the things that we advised, you all to do is bring all that on, incorporate all of that, see all. So when the phone rings or there's a conversation had and you guys are discussing it here at the table, that the information that was presented to you told the whole story. And I think that that's important, and certainly I think that all your management people certainly were very responsive and certainly addressing that. I know that there's some other comments there that dealt a lot with policy and procedure, one including a policy and procedural manual, collecting your individual policies and procedures and really putting them in a central place. You know, having some kind of a best practice journal, for lack of a better way to say it, where you can refer to. You know, and it's not that policy procedure is good, and policy and procedure is necessary. And it's necessary when you've got some kind of a reference. And when you go to that reference and it details and outlines what you should be doing because you've approved it or adopted it at some board or some administrative level, and you're not doing it, policy and procedure can be used against you. And I think that there's some comments that we had with your management as well. So, but this is something this is who we are, this is what we do. I thought it was very important because I understand, and they told me not to scare you tonight because I don't think that you guys are used to, you know, seeing auditors in a room, but we're here to help. We're not here to hinder. We're not here to cry fire. We're here to say, you know what, you know, here's the results as we see it. We're here to work with you. We're here to work with you on best practice, but more importantly, we're here to be your sounding board, you know, and we see a lot, we understand a lot, we don't sit in your chairs, and if there's one thing I always say, if you can put us in a room and have a conversation, how we doing compared to others, hey, is there anything that we should be alarmed or concerned about? Here I am, you know, and I think that that's always a great opportunity to present to you as a board, you know, who are the governing body of this organization, to allow you the opportunity to certainly ask any questions that you have. So having said that, I think I've pretty well hit on all my talking points for this evening.
You had mentioned when we were reviewing the balance sheet, in terms of a reserve to have, there was a percentage. Is that a state statute, or is that a best practices, general accounting across the board, or is it very specific to schools?
It's a best practice statute for sure, and to the point where the Governmental Accounting Standards Board adopts that best practice, and they're a national association. But the state of Vermont also has its own statutes too internally that applies to school systems. And the statute that it says for school systems is that carryover balances shall be used for one of two purposes: for future property tax relief, or to transfer into a reserve fund to be used at a later date for an intended purpose, okay? And there really ought to be, even though there's statute that exists out there, you ought to really have a policy that kind of dictates, you know, what happens there. So to answer your question, that's for general school systems in the state of Vermont, which I would probably make the argument that you fall under. I'm not sure, though, if it really got challenged that these career centers fall under that statute.
Right.
But certainly to say and have some kind of rhyme or reason, you know, of what you're carrying over for reserve, what you're moving into reserve funds, like your building and equipment reserve fund, you know, it should be somewhat consistent with what the other school practices are in the state, and I think yours is. I think you're just lean. You know, there's a lot of lean school systems in the state of Vermont, and you're no exception, so.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions?
Yeah, one of the things, I've been doing the accounts payables for schools for a long time, and the fact that we have some directors that show up and look at the accounts payables, and we look for two signatures. We don't necessarily know, on one hand, we try not getting into the weeds about micromanaging the accounts. I've often sort of questioned or challenged the prudence of directors looking at the accounts payable in terms of being a real, what's the word I'm looking for, sort of a solid check and balance.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would argue. We do the City of Burlington School Department, you know, largest school department in the state. And when they have a $1.2 million warrant with 700 items that they just paid, it's just not prudent, you know, for a board of commissioners to sit down of 11, you know, and say, hey, I'm gonna thumb through here and just look for reasonableness. So the first thing that I would say is, do you have a policy where you kind of have anointed maybe your treasurer or somebody from your board to sign off on that warrant and put them in the trust and capacity that at least it's been looked at by a delegate elected by your respective boards? That's the first thing that I would ask. The next thing that I would say is, and I'm a big fan of this, when that's signed at a board meeting, to have it available, so if a question comes up or a board member does wanna look at it, there's no harm in that. Matter of fact, that's what I would want. And if you have that information available, you at least allow the opportunity for every person staying at this table, I'd like to look at that. So if the phone rings and somebody says, I haven't been paid, or whatever the reason is, we're having a problem paying our bills, for goodness sakes. The last thing that you wanna find out, is that you've got a cash flow problem, or you've got other problems out there, and your management, isn't giving you the real story out there, and you find out because on the street you hear, hey, the Hannaford Career Center's not paying their bills, they still owe the contractor for some renovation work that they're doing over there to that building. So to have the opportunity to at least see, and in front of you have that warrant for the bills that are getting paid, so that you can see where the money's going, or not, I think it's important, I think it is. And if you choose as an individual member not to look at it or whatever, and you put your full faith and trust in the person that you've elected to look at that warrant, there you go. But at least it's there on that table, so that you have you've been given the opportunity to look and review. So I'm a big fan of that, big fan. So.
How do you feel about that, Lorraine?
I feel very, Mark and I have been on boards together for a long time, and
Yeah.
I feel very strongly that board members have a fiduciary responsibility to review bills.
Yeah.
And which is why I was on finance for almost all the time I've been on the board, 15 years.
Yeah.
I really believe strongly.
I'm with you, I believe it too, but you may have some that don't feel the same way as passionate as you are about that board member, but at least it's there, they can look at it, and if they choose not to, that's a conscious choice that they've made. And then I would add to kind of beat the drum a little bit about what about all your enterprise funds? You got thousands of dollars running through those enterprise funds, and of course, did you look at those?
No?
No.
Yeah, and that's why I say, you really wanna bring all this stuff in shop, and at least have the opportunity to look at.
And
I would
that's
add-
one of the things that we're
Yeah.
actually doing with the Tyler
Yeah,
recommendation that you.
and I would argue that's probably your most vulnerable area of the school system. I would.
Yeah, we heard about that from these guys.
Yeah.
So
So,
thank you for
and they
that.
were very responsive after we talked about it, and it just made sense, and again, we continue, but I just adore your passion, because I'm the same way, and if other people just don't, for whatever reason, they've made a conscious choice that they've entrusted somebody else, or you, or somebody else to go look at, that's a choice that they've made, so, but at least you've given them the opportunity to look.
Okay. Excellent. Any additional questions? All right, on these enterprise funds, I'm presuming we're talking about any fund that's related to the Career Center in any way, shape, or
Correct.
form. So any student funds, program funds,
Scholarships.
scholarship funds, they should all be under the same umbrella, and
Correct.
we should be giving them the same level of care
Correct.
that we give our general fund.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Is there anything that would fall outside of that you can think of?
No,
Okay.
I think it's all under your purview.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Great
you very
pleasure.
much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for taking.
Thanks, Ron.
How much ice on Harvey's Lake?
How much ice on Harvey's Lake? Enough. I'd say I bet you there's a foot of ice down there. Ask
Really?
that question in 2 weeks, because opening season is Saturday, right? Yeah, ice fishing season is Saturday. Yeah.
On Harvey, no? Okay.
So, yeah, Smelton's on now.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
All right, take a motion to accept the auditor's report.
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay, motion has carried. Next on our agenda is to approve the 2018-2019 budget. This is a statutory requirement. There's a copy of that budget in your packet. So, organized here. I'll turn it over to Dana to address the budget and field any questions.
So since the last time we met in December, we've made a few adjustments to the budget. I would call your attention to the back page. because that summarizes the changes. At the very bottom, you have the proposed budget at $3,468,524. That is a $14,025 difference from the current year's budget, and the percentage change is 0.4%, compared to the current year budget. The areas that resulted in those decreases were areas, I think, in services and payroll that we were just adjusting so that they were brought more in line with what we were expecting for whether it's benefits or salaries or other items that were human services related. And Gibson just found some savings that were just being carried on as a previous figure, and that those had changed. And I think you may have saved us something on interest or something as well. So that's what that reflects as opposed to last month. So that's basically the changes. Everything else is pretty much the same. Feel free to look through it. You have all of the departments and areas outlined, and you have percentage changes in the right-hand columns. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will do my best, or turn it over to Gibson to explain whatever I can.
Oh,
Yes,
then on the warning,
the warning?
there's Article 10, it says the projected spending per full-time equivalent student is 0.4 less. I don't think that's is that the equivalent student, or is that the total cost?
That's a mistake in the.
I think that's a mistake.
That's a mistake, because that is the total budget, the
That's-
per student.
The total cost is 0.4 less.
The
Total
total
cost,
cost is less, the per pupil spending is
I can tell you
going
that
up.
number, and I don't know why
per the
that's there.
worksheet.
That must be a typo. Because if you look at, it's 8.16% per FTE. Well, no, that's the total. Sorry.
That's the change.
Yeah, that's the total change.
That's change in tuition.
Yeah.
Yeah, that-
What are we required to under statute to report under that section? Is it a per pupil cost? Because the per pupil cost of 21,466 is the right number in terms of what the per pupil cost is.
That is the
It's
right.
just the wrong percentage.
Projected spending per full-time equivalent.
No.
Projected spending per full-time equivalent.
This project.
I don't know why that's a percentage, but, what
And
is?
it's not correct anyway.
No, it is
It-
not
it-
correct.
You should just take out this projected spending is, or not take out.
In total
take out-
is.
If you didn't do it a percentage, the
Yeah.
total change,
Take out per
Yeah.
full-time equivalent student, cross that out, and the sentence is correct.
In total is.
I would like to take a step back, as a point of order.
Yeah.
This warning isn't up for discussion at
It
this
isn't.
point.
That was my fault.
It is incorrect, and we'll have to address that, but I'd like to address that under, that particular item on the agenda,
thank you.
if that's all right.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're strictly looking at
Okay.
the budget. We've looked at all the other stuff, so we know what that means. But, right now, it's more so the budget items, which is at a negative 0.4% increase, which is the lowest budget in the last 7 years.
That's good.
So, just for reference. You give me the look, is that not the case?
That is the, yeah.
Okay.
It is the lowest,
All right.
and that's what I referenced in my table that I presented in the in my superintendent's report. So I gave you all of the budgets for the last 7 years, and this is the lowest.
Are there any questions on sections, line items, total budget?
So in considering what the auditor just said about being really lean, does this make us even more lean? And is that wise? Or am I?
I'm presuming in this process, since we have increased fixed costs through the master agreement, and insurance costs that are, that are out of our hands, that there's been a lot of trimming that's taking place in this budget. So I wouldn't say that, my speculation would be that, that this is a pretty lean budget.
It is a pretty lean budget. I'm not sure that I could answer your question in the affirmative, Missy. We are prudent, we are conservative. We budget a little bit high on the expense side and a little bit low on the revenue side, in order to be able to make sure that there would be the appropriate buffer. So we can, within this budget, shift and anticipate changes, and we could certainly tighten our belts on some of the things that are in the budget, should a need arise. So, given what Ron was saying in terms of leaner, I don't know that this budget would put us in any jeopardy, but it may not contribute to an excess over the amount that is currently there for expendable funds. So if we were moving to the 10% at the, 320,000, this budget does not have $100,000 in it.
Right.
That we will just be able to hold over.
So in other words, it contributes to keeping it to about, he used the 20-day, we have about 20 days as opposed to the recommended 30 days. But
Yes.
that's where we need to be currently.
We are comfortable where we are, I think, and we're not going to be adding a third or half again as much to that. But there is some in there because we like to anticipate any unforeseen events. So it hasn't been trimmed back to the bone necessarily.
Laurie?
I was just thinking, given our earlier resignation of a very veteran teacher, there's the possibility of perhaps some added income already going back into the budget.
There might be. It would depend on,
Right, on the hiring.
on step and scale and a variety of other things. So there might be a modest savings in that particular area. That is true.
Any additional questions? Entertain a motion to approve the.
So moved.
It's been moved. It's been moved and seconded to approve the 2018-2019 budget. Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. And the motion is carried. Next is to approve the 2018-2019 adult tech ed budget.
And you should have a handout for clarification purposes that Kim was handing out for you. Just is the most accurate.
And for clarification, this is not a budget that goes to the voters, and it doesn't affect tax or assessment. This is a self-funding.
That's correct.
This is self-funded through tuition.
Right.
So.
And grants.
And grants.
Other sources of, but it does not place any burden on the taxpayer.
So we're showing a 6.25% decrease.
6.5.
Or did I have the wrong one? I have the wrong one. 6.1.
Sorry about that.
I got the wrong one.
When you passed out, you asked me to pass out, it says 6.25.
Yeah. Which is also
really?
the one that was emailed
Oh, wait a
to
second,
us.
hang on. I'm sorry. Mine was older. I apologize.
All right.
I didn't throw mine. That was in my packet from the other day.
right.
It's 6.25.
All right. Is there anything additionally you want to present on this? Or you just want to open it up for questions?
It's open for questions. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's
Okay.
very simple.
All right, are there any questions? All right, hearing none, all those in, oh, no? Haha, got myself. Accept a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Now, any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. And the motion is carried. Next item, to approve announced tuition. There's a estimated tuition worksheet in your packet. I'll turn it over to Dana.
We walked through this last month with the preliminary worksheet. Once again, at the top of your worksheet, you have the budgeted amount of $3,468,524.36. And then you have the column to the left of that that has the anticipated revenues. The only changes that we have are a clarification on the Perkins grant that we have at 104. We believe that to be a good number. And the salary reimbursement at 113,000. That is a little lower than what we had last month by, I don't have that with me. I think it was about $10,000. And in our conversations with AOE, we needed to make sure that the number that we were putting in for revenue was a good number. To Missy's question earlier about whether we have a little buffer, we think that that number will actually be higher, more in line with what we had last month. We decided to leave it this way because of the time lag with AOE. And so we want to make sure that from year to year that number in terms of revenues is going to be valid. And if we get more, then that will help contribute to our bottom line. So we're very comfortable with that number, leaving us with $290,000 approximately in revenues. As you go down further, step 4 shows that we have 127.58 FTEs. That has not changed. That's the same number that we gave you last month. We have the state-based payment, and we have the tuition assistance payment that come off of those. And then we have the amount that needs to be raised by taxes, $1,645,657.81, and that is what gets assessed proportionately to the three, it's not just three, to our sending schools. 3 primary ones within our area, our local area, and then we have fractional numbers that come from other school districts in the broader area, down in Rutland County or over in Windsor County perhaps, or even up north. So when you take the full amount of the estimated tuition per FTE would be $12,898.69. And our total technical center tuition is $21,466, which you saw previously. Okay? So the announced tuition for the individual schools is $12,899. Our total cost is $21,466.
Which is an increase.
Of about $1,300, the total cost.
Right.
The percentage increase from last year's billable at $11,925 is a 8.16% increase. Very similar to what I presented last month.
So the budget was the good news, and this is the less than good news. Mark?
Right, yeah, and I thought I would wait till this point in the action agenda to bring up the per pupil costs, because it is always nice to see a budget go down, but our per pupil costs are going up 8%. And last year, I had asked Dana to run some numbers for us, and essentially, we've seen per pupil costs increase every year except for last year's, since the 12-13 year. And that's when it was $17,549. I think moving forward, as we start moving away from our budget part of the year, that we'll have to start looking at this and addressing this. I know all the schools, all the school districts are really looking at per pupil costs, and it's something that we've been aware of, but we don't really dive into too much. And I think we should be looking at that on our agendas as we move forward.
The driving factor of this is a decrease in the FTEs, which was a 6 FTE decrease roughly from last year's budget. Logic would dictate if the overall budget went down and our FTEs stayed the same, then our per pupil spending would be in the negative as well. But unfortunately, with the FTEs going down, that causes what appears to be a very drastic change in our per pupil spending. This isn't something that's new, as Mark alluded to, and it's not something that is slated to go away. We looked at the 6 semesters, not the 6 semester averages, but we looked at the 6 semesters that make up this, and we have 2 big years, or 2 big semesters dropping off in next budgeting cycle as well. So it's about increasing the enrollment within the center to help offset this, to give better use of the taxpayer money, as well as better opportunities for students. So, because as we continue to cut the budget, that takes away from the monies available to educate and to bring stuff into the classrooms.
So what I handed out was what Mark asked me a question about, and I thought that it would be beneficial for you as board members to see what Mark was just referencing visually. So what you have in front of you is a comparison to what I put in my superintendent's report on the costs and the budgets for the last 7 years. And so what I did here was I put in the per pupil cost for the last 7 years. And the per pupil cost is a function of the 6 semester FTEs, which you have in the second column from the right. And when you look at the per pupil cost, if you consider that our budget this year is the lowest of all of those budgets, which you have, those figures you have in my report, and you just take the FTEs and go down the column, that second column to the left, and go down the page, if the FTEs were at the same as last year, the cost per student would be approximately $1,300 less. If you went to the fourth one down, it would be actually, for the fifth one down on 141, if we had 141 students, our cost would be approximately $18,000 or lower. If we went all the way down to the bottom, you see that the cost there would be approximately $17,500. And we have capacity to actually serve that number of students. So I think I reported previously that we have capacity in our programs, and if we added approximately 30 students, we would have a much different per pupil cost, and we have that capacity. So that's one of the things that we're working on center-wide to see if we can actually have students participate more fully in our programs. We're happy to report that two of our sending schools do a very good job of maintaining their numbers and actually having a higher, their numbers, the number of students are remaining steady even though their home population is decreasing. And that helps us in terms of having a larger percentage in our programs and serving those students. If we could achieve that across the board, then we would, I think, have a better bottom line in terms of their future costs. And we'll be working on that throughout the year, moving forward.
Any other questions? Lorraine?
Are we allowed to ask which sending school is not in that two sending school group?
If you'd like. Our actual drop in FTEs is directly linked to Middlebury, because their FTEs have dropped by the exact same number that ours have dropped over that time frame, whereas the FTEs for Mount Haven for Gens have remained constant. And that means that their portion of students total to their total population has actually gone up, whereas for Middlebury it has gone down. So if we were getting the same number over the FTE average, our per pupil cost would have decreased, as Jason just mentioned.
And are you thinking that with the IB coming in, that that's going to make it worse as far as students?
I would hope not. My projection would be that we can serve a core population that would need IB work. I've talked with Peter Burrows, and we have staff members talking with our colleagues up the hallway about what that would look like. And we will be pursuing appropriately the necessary certification in IB at the CP level that would allow those students to get an IB CP certificate. So we're hoping that it will all converge in a positive way for student success, and that we would be part of that rather than working separately. So.
Any further discussion? Not take a motion to.
Move to approve the announced tuition.
Can we have somebody check the math? Please.
You mean the 12,898, 69?
Yeah. 9847 times 87% times 6 semester average, coming up with a different number. 9847 times 3.5 times 6 semester average. So those numbers are coming up differently. I'm coming up with 12,899.33. So a slight difference. So I think we should just verify those, make sure I'm not, could be a rounding error.
Yeah,
It's in a spreadsheet. It's done by
Right.
calculation.
Well, I'm wondering if it's an issue of the 6 semester average not being .58. It's something.
Could be a rounding.
Yeah.
Because it's very close, but if I take the numbers here, they're not right.
So,
But if it's a rounding, that's why I
Yeah.
said, can somebody check? I'm not saying
Yeah.
you're wrong.
nope.
I'm not saying, but if I take them here, can we just check them? I'll make a motion that we accept it based on this recommendation with the understanding that somebody will check the rounding to make sure those numbers are correct.
I'll accept that.
Works for me. So that's a second? Is that what I just heard? So it's been seconded. Is there any further discussion? Would you like to another option is to withdraw that
Well, I
motion, and
accepted
then, and we can have Dana Gibson step out, run these numbers, verify that, so that make sure we're approving the right number. Because the next step is to approve the warning, and if this number isn't correct here, it's not correct here.
If I had to guess, it's a rounding
Yeah.
error, and
Yeah.
I'm just taking the numbers that are here.
Okay.
And somebody should check me as
Yeah.
well.
I just need some clarity what number I'm checking, I'm sorry.
So if I just run these numbers here, if you look at step 5, where it says 1,092,992,009
Yeah,
that's, if I go to the left and take that 9,847 times 87% times the 6 semester average, that number does not equal that. And then step 6, same thing, which means step 7 changes, which means the per pupil estimated tuition.
You have 12,899, what?
0.33.
You're talking about a difference
Of a
of,
dollar.
of 64
Yeah,
cents.
I said, that's why it's probably around here, but
Yep.
if I'm doing this, somebody else is gonna take the numbers and say, what the hell,
Yeah.
you guys can't add, what's going on? So let's get it.
Yep.
Let's get it right.
check it out.
Okay.
And maybe they are right, if I said,
So-
let's not,
So here's what would you like to
Tell me
withdraw?
what to do.
I'd like you to withdraw your motion.
I withdraw my motion.
Okay.
Respectfully.
All right, I would like to, while Gibson double checks those numbers, I'm gonna skip ahead in the agenda, because if we're not gonna approve the announced tuition, I don't wanna move to the, approving the warning. So I'm gonna jump to the informational portion of the agenda, and when Gibson comes back with the revised numbers, we'll jump back to the action agenda and take care of those 2 items.
I'll
So-
have them check on that other line item while we're.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not in a.
Yep.
I want to make sure we're approving the right numbers, mainly because we need to get this published, because we have it needs to be published shortly, so that we have this information ahead of the annual meeting, which is on February 14th. So, hope no one had Valentine's plans. So, under the informational agenda, first item is the facilities report. Was there one in the packet? It wasn't in your packet. We met on Monday. Those meeting minutes were distributed to the committee members. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about what we covered in that, and we'll get those out to the board at a later date. We typically don't approve the meeting minutes from committees on a board level, but if you want to take a minute and just touch on where we stand.
So, I'm trying to visualize the agenda in my head. We talked about the sidewalk, and they're working out the bugs. If you're coming in when there's snow or ice on the sidewalk, you'll notice to the right side, there's a section that isn't melting the same as the rest, so John is working through that. Let's see, we're fully operational with natural gas. We haven't used oil. They have followed through and filed the necessary paperwork for the underground storage tank, so that topic is checked off the list. The purchase order for the bus has been issued, and the Carolina Bus Sales is making the necessary, doing the necessary work on the bus. They're painting it so that it meets the Vermont specifications. And then when that's ready, John will schedule a trip down to pick it up and drive it back. We talked about the audits a bit, and I believe those were sent around for everyone to view. Lots of good information in there. And John and Dana had talked about they're working with each of the program directors and staff to make the list and work through any of the recommendations that were made from Visbet, which is good to hear. Let's see, we talked about the security audit and the camera quote, and that work is scheduled. What am I missing?
That's
You
it.
have better memory than I do.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there was no new business.
All right.
Any questions? Sorry.
Any questions?
All right. Next is the budget policy report. I don't believe there's a copy of those meeting minutes in here either. We met right after Christmas? No, Valencia.
Before Christmas, wasn't it? I don't think we've had anything.
Yeah. And my memory is
20th.
not as good as Melissa's, so I can't recite what we did without the meeting minutes. I do want to, I think it'd be prudent at this point to mention, since we have a significant amount of faculty and staff here tonight, that we know that this was a tough budget cycle, and to get to where we are with this budget, it took a lot of work from everybody, and we appreciate that effort. So, thank you. I can. You're gonna make me do this, aren't you? So we have Cheryl Warner, Mike Adaman, Lisa Rader, and Jake Brown. Next on our agenda is the community engagement report. We had a meeting it was last week. Kim, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Basically reviewing the first meeting we had and just, where's our direction, where are we going? And identifying partners that we're working with, topics for outreach. Some of it circumvents what we'd already talked about, timelines for budget approval and so on. And spent a little time talking about open house, and which is going to be on February 15th, the day after our annual meeting. And Dana's left the room, but Kelly, I don't know if you could talk to the group a little bit about the Marker Minds February.
Maker.
Thank you, Maker Minds February.
Maker Minds.
Thank you. If you could talk about that a little
Actually, I
bit.
can take Vernon to do that job.
Just what it entails.
So we are in the process of two things. One, using the February open house as a school maker fair. We're sending out the call to makers, to local people who make things out of things, showcase what they have made. In an effort to launch the Career Center as a makerspace. There's a makerspace, there are two in Burlington and one in Rutland, and we feel a significant void in between for those older than 18 who would like to make but don't have access to equipment. We have a wonderful building full of great equipment that isn't always utilized. So the February open house hopes to launch the awareness of the school as a makerspace.
Excellent.
Thank you. The other conversation we had was regarding the staff initiatives here, making connections to the sending schools. And I think in actually Kelly's notes, there's a conversation about a meeting that's happening in January with representatives from the sending schools regarding calendars.
Yes,
all
all schedules.
And that. Little planning about the annual meeting, which, if you've attended it before, we're going to have our regular meeting first, and then we'll break and have that annual setup. And just a reminder again, open house is the day after that. And I know from personal experience, it's really nice when board members can come and share, their interests and so on with other faculty members and parents of students that come too, or prospective ones. I think it's a nice time for them to put a face to us other than on a video camera about what we do and and how much we appreciate the facility. We're gonna meet again on February 7th, next meeting.
Yep.
You wanna add anything?
No, I don't. I think you did
Thank you.
a great job. Next would be the superintendent's report. There's a copy of that in your packet. Turn it over to Dana. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Oops. Major component of the report was the budget development and the articles, which we have before us. If you have any questions? The number, by the way, if you look on page 1 of your report, where I have the percentage change on the, it's the last column on the right and the last quadrant, 6.47%. That is the figure that should appear on the warning for our percentage change. So if you go back to your warning, if I'm on now, where it says the projected spending per full-time equivalent student should be is 6.47% higher than spending for the current year. Does that make sense? And in fact, that's what also appears on your comparison of FTEs, 6.47%. So that is the real number.
Okay.
Other than that, in the report, I give you all of the percentages and all of the budgets for the last 7 years. I also noted that the budget for next year, the proposed budget for next year, is only $18,390 above the FY10 budget. So that gives you an idea of how well the Career Center has been performing historically in terms of managing the budget. Jake commented on the Maker Faire, as did Kim, and I just want to thank everybody who has been part of that process. There were a number of members of the team, both here at the Career Center and outside members, who have been contributing a considerable amount of time and energy to attracting attention to what we want to do for youth and adults, as well as community members, in terms of using our resources and helping to prepare people for good workforce employment. And the other two items that I put in here were my report on the Vermont Talent Pipeline, which is linked to the Maker Faire, and the Governor's Education Summit that I attended. I have links there to that you can look at, and you can certainly read through my report. The personnel update, we are in the final stages of hiring someone for the position vacated by Josie Masterson Glenn last month, and we should have somebody on board in the next 2 weeks. And that's a paraeducator position, so it's not a professional staff member for your action. Thank you.
Any questions for Dana in regards to his superintendent's report? All right, let's jump back to, at this point, back to the approving the announced tuition. Are we ready to?
So, yeah, I'd like to revise the figures as Mike pointed out. So if we could revise the step 5.
Step 3 or step 5, Gibson?
I'm sorry, step 5, 1,000.
1 million.
1,092,963.83. revise step 6 to 439,698.09. And what that will revise step 7 through a calculation, that will change that number to 1,645,697.44. And divide that number by the 6-semester average. And we get a revised estimated tuition per FTE of 12,899.33, or 0.34.
And that was due to a rounding calculation in the spreadsheet,
Yes.
and that's been there for a decade, just so you know. We didn't create that. We checked a lot of things in our numbers. We did not get down to the rounding formula
So-
in there. We will change that moving forward.
So what does that? Does that change the bottom line?
It will change the bottom line from 12, the local assessment from 12,899 to 12. Well, I don't know if it would, 899, because the rounding, you drop off the 3-4, but
Correct. As I said, it's gonna be rounding,
Yep.
and you're right there, and you still have the 21,466. But if anyone checks math,
Yep.
Yep.
now you can say, yes.
All right, so we have the revised numbers. I would ask that if this is approved tonight, if this revised sheet could be forwarded to board members, so we have it for our packets. Be great, appreciated. So do we have a motion to accept?
So moved.
All right. And a second? That's, all right, so it's been
That's
moved.
Kim.
Yeah, Kim. So it's been moved and seconded to approve the announced tuition. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Right.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay. The announced tuition has been passed. Next.
At $21,466.
At $21,466 per FTE. The next item would be to approve the warning. There's a copy of that in your packet.
And there are several warnings there, I think.
There are 10 articles total. We've already identified that there's a mistake in Article 10. The last sentence currently reads, "This projected spending per full-time equivalent student is 4% less than spending for the current year." And that's not correct. It is being revised to, "This projected spending per full-time equivalent student is 6.47% higher than the spending for the current year." So, thank you, Nick, for catching that. Is there any questions? All right. So this mirrors last year's, with the exception of a few minor changes. We removed the bylaw changes that we voted on last year, and we've also added Article 8 and Article 7, which are around the health reimbursement accounts. One to set up the fund, and one to fund that fund. So,
And we're requesting 25,000 to go to the building equipment and reserve fund, and 50,000 if the article is passed, for creating the health reimbursement account, reserve account.
is there any questions? not, I'd accept a motion to accept the warning as revised.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
Article 6, is there supposed to be a dollar figure there of what amount you're requesting to use?
There hasn't been, it's just.
No,
It's just to authorize the board to actually make expenditures out of that fund.
we have to authorize the money going in, and then we have to authorize, the voters have to authorize the board to spend that money, similar to the other two articles that were added. So,
That's a standard one that's been on the
Yep.
warnings for as long back as I can check.
all right. So it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. And the motion is carried. Thank you for taking care of that, Gibson. That wraps up our action agenda. We'll move back to our informational agenda. Next on our list is the Dean of Students report. There is a copy of that report in your packet. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mills to talk to it and field questions.
Okay, so a couple things I'd like to highlight. Number one, the Vermont Farm Show is coming up. It's going to be on January 31st, and we will be sending our agriculture students there to compete in different career development events. And some of those events will lead to eligibility for the National FFA Convention, which will be next October, while others are skills contests that, such as winter forestry, that students get to compete with other students around the state, however, they do not lead to eligibility for national convention. So what happens is we have our own contests that we run here in Vermont that are FFA sanctioned, but they aren't necessarily nationally sanctioned. So that's one thing. We're approaching the end of semester 1 on January 23rd. And to speak to what Kim had said, 3 of our stakeholders' high schools, Mount Abraham, Virgins, and Middlebury, are all exploring bell schedule changes for the next school year for various reasons. So I'm going to be meeting with Justin Bouvier, who's the assistant principal at Mount Abraham Union High School, Jay Stetzel, who is the current assistant principal at Virgins Union High School, and Kathy Beeman, who is the assistant principal at Middlebury Union High School, and we're going to sit down and begin a conversation about how this is going to look for our students attending the Hannaford Career Center. So I'm excited to have that happen and see what sort of ideas we can drum up. So this is an excellent opportunity for collaboration that I'm really encouraged by. And then, as everyone keeps talking, we will have our open house on the 15th of February, 4 to 7. And this is an opportunity for our programs and our students to show off what we've done this year. So we'll have students, current students here, showing off, doing demonstrations. The culinary arts program, their students come up with an amazing array of hors d'oeuvres, and our Addison Repertory Theater performance and technical students will be in costume, and I have no idea what that will look like because they're very creative, and they will be hand passing those hors d'oeuvres. We'll have door prizes. Sometimes we have a petting zoo, sometimes we have other demonstrations such as our sawmill, and we have the Maker Fair. So we've got lots of things to be excited about. So that's basically my report. If there's any questions.
Any questions for Kelly? All right, thank you very much. The open house is at both campuses, correct?
Yes, it is. Yes. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is the Adult Tech Ed report. Turn it over to Richard Smith.
Certainly you're not going to make a mistake of saying nothing.
Well played, well played.
We have had some development since I wrote the report a week ago. The February LNA class is full. We're starting to enroll students for the spring semester using updated registration forms. We have become aware of
our ability to do a better job of marketing if we get a little bit more demographic information, contact information from students, so we're working on that. We're also anticipating that the Agency of Education is going to start recognizing attending adult education programs at technical centers as a positive post-graduation outcome for all high school students. They have never before kept track of a federally recognized category called trade school, and they recognize that that is essentially what adult tech ed programs are. So we're going to start gathering year and high school graduation for Vermont residents so that we're able to feed that information back to ARE. As part of our working here much more closely with the statewide Vermont Adult CTE Association to raise awareness of what our collective tech centers statewide are able to do for adults. That's getting a little bit more attention in Montpelier these days, and there may be some funding that comes out of the upcoming budget. That's very tentative right now, and I'm not sure that the funding will match our needs. But the idea that somebody out there wants to recognize the work that we're doing and give us money is a good thing.
Excellent. Excellent. Any questions for Len? All right. Thank you very much. So the next item on our agenda is entrance proficiency findings presentations. So I'm going to turn it over to Dana to introduce.
So I'd like to welcome our Entrance Proficiency Committee, comprised of Kelly Mills, Mike Adaman, Cheryl Warner, and Lisa Rader. They have worked tirelessly throughout the first semester to take some of the work that was begun last year and fashion it into a set of guidelines that we are sharing with our sending schools, and they have also gathered feedback on those proficiencies from the sending schools to help define our work as we move forward. So I'll turn it over to Kelly and the proficiency team.
Okay, so briefly, we're just going to quickly have the faculty members introduce what their roles are here at the Career Center. Everyone knows who I am. Mike?
Special Needs Coordinator.
Hi, Cheryl Warner, Agriculture Instructor and FFA Advisor.
Hi, I'm Lisa Rader. I teach Visual Communications and Design and Illustration.
So I'm going to start out sort of with just how our journey started. Vermont Department of Ed has mandated by 2020 that we will transition from sort of a credit Carnegie hour seat time type education to a proficiency standard-based education. Last year we embarked on a journey with Gabe and Andrew. They're Mount Abe instructors. They had a fellowship. They have been going around and instructing teachers around the state, different schools. We came to the conclusion based on that we would no longer be able to say kids were proficient, were ready to come and face success with us, which is what we want. We want kids to come to us that have the basic skill sets where they will face good success with us and be able to move on to their next steps based on, oh, you've got 15 credit hours. So then we started looking at, well, what would a student look like that would come to us that would be successful? Kelly and I met a couple times last spring. We did a survey with our staff. We were asked, would you fellow instructors tell us, based on what you need for your course for kids to be successful, what kind of statements would they have to be able to do? My students, they should be able to do. We crafted some language, and that was sort of our work for last spring. We went on this fall, and I'll let Kelly talk about this year's work. Okay. So after we had our read-through with members of our stakeholder community from the 3 different high schools, we went back to the drawing board. We had a pre-service workshop sessions with our colleagues yet again, and we went back to the drawing board in terms of forming the committee that you see in front of us here. And it's important to note that we have a really excellent cross-section of talent among us that provided some different experiences in terms of breadth of knowledge of what students need to be successful here at the Career Center coming into the Career Center. So the first thing we did was we sat down and we were like, why are we reinventing the wheel and trying to wordsmith? That was the biggest feedback takeaway we had from last spring's read-through. The language that we thought made sense wasn't necessarily the language that our stakeholders thought made sense. And they were like, well, we need a glossary. What are you talking about? And when Cheryl and I were working with the statements that our colleagues had provided with us, we were using all kinds of industry relevant language. And they were like, wait, these aren't kids that are leaving the Career Center. These are kids that are coming in. So we took note of that and we were like, well, you know what? Let's look at the Common Core, the Next Generation Science Standards, those are the acronyms for those organizations, in the Common Career Technical Core. These organizations are nationally recognized. They have put all the resources in research and come up with these standards. Everyone's already using them. They're common language. Let's adopt ours from there. So we sat down and that's what we came up with. So after we had drafted that list, we did a warm and cool protocol with our faculty member to get some feedback. And then from there, we put that in the back of our mind, and then we sent out invitations to the same individuals that attended last spring's, plus a few others that had been added to our list. Unfortunately, we had 2 representatives from Virgins show up, even though we had lots of RSVPs. So we went through another warm and cool protocol with that group, plus some of our colleagues joined in too. And we reconvened as a group and we were like, we need to take this on the road. We're gonna go to them. So each one of us reached out to our colleagues at our sending schools and we met with individuals from Mount Abe and Middlebury. And we were able to get more information from them. Heard some of the same information we heard from Virgins, but we got more. And so we made more revisions and then we submitted a full report. It's 20 pages long. If anybody's interested in seeing it, I'll be glad to email it to you, but I don't have copies with me because, like I said, it's pretty long. So anyway, to the faculty, staff, and administration, along with a timeline that we recommended and future action items based upon what we learned from our colleagues. Lisa?
So I'm going to just run through some of the highlights from the warm and cool feedback that we received from our colleagues at our sending schools. First of all, thanks to a lot of this back work and having preliminary conversations with our colleagues at our different sending schools, we found that we had a very nice alignment with transferable skills and our schools' core values and missions. That was great to see. So we were all on the same page already. As a school, the Career Center is really out front with this process as far as developing entrance proficiencies and what that might look like. Our sending school colleagues liked the personalized statements that read with the I can statement. Those put the student voice on those proficiency statements. So they're not meant to be read merely by a guidance counselor or a parent or a teacher, but that students can really hear their own voices in those statements and own those proficiency statements. Thanks to our work together as a faculty here, we developed an overarching range of skills that address the proficiencies that relate to all Career Center programs. So they're not just focused in the area of science or focused in social skills, but really that they would apply to any program at the Career Center. Our sending schools really liked that that was a generalized approach and that there was a collective mission there. Also, warm feedback is that they enjoyed the collaborative work, that they enjoyed working with us, and that it was improving communication amongst that we had with our sending schools. Some of the concerns. Our sending schools are not ready for this. We, as I said, we're kind of out front, which is great, but it's good that this is getting kind of introduced as part of our work with Gabe and Andrew. It took Mount Abe several years to get the community to understand what is a proficiency statement, what does this look like for the learner, what does this look like for our experience. But it's a good conversation starter. Also, there are a lot of logistical questions. The most common question is, okay, you have these entrance proficiencies. What happens if a student doesn't make the entrance proficiency? Does that mean they don't get to go to Lisa Rader's design and illustration program? So the question became like, is it possible to waive some of these entrance proficiency statements? It's a good question, one that we really can't answer at that time, but you can see how that question about my program may be answered differently than if it said, is it okay to waive the math requirement for Jake Burnham's architecture and engineering class? Also, it's very difficult to conceive of this happening when our grading software is not set up for a proficiency-based system. So we're working through that problem, and also the sending schools that we work with have different softwares. It's not necessarily the software that we are using. So those are the main concerns that we found in our meet and greets.
Okay, so moving forward, the first order of business will be to establish a new team to press on with the next phase of the proficiency work. And once this team is intact, there are a number of action items that the team will be charged with prioritizing and then executing. I'd like to just briefly run through what some of those are. The first being to establish and roll out a timeline for the public and our educational partners. Next being to clearly delineate what are expectations versus requirements with regard to the entrance proficiencies. Third bullet in terms of the action items, determine how to best obtain entrance proficiency data from sending schools. Fourth bullet, determine protocol around whether or not a program instructor can designate a priority list of entrance proficiencies for their particular program. Lisa had just touched on that. Fifth bullet, create a promotional strategy for communicating changes associated with the implementation of entrance proficiencies. Sixth bullet, articulate options and protocols for students who don't meet entrance proficiencies. Lisa had touched on that as well. And then the last action item is to create exit proficiencies for completers. So this is a significant undertaking that this next phase will consist of. And this is the core of the action items. There are some other smaller pieces as well, but that is a pretty good summarization of what this next phase will consist of and look like. So we want to now open it up to any questions that you all might have.
All right. So, are you saying that there's currently no criteria for someone to enroll in any of your programs?
Can I answer that question?
Sure.
Well, going into next year, we will keep the requirements that we have. And so that is, if you would want to get into a specific program, you would need to have the prerequisite classes and a certain number of credits.
Okay. So
As the
our-
proficiency model is further along the path, we will be looking at proficiency statements to ensure that students have the skill sets they need in order to be successful here.
So our newly up-and-coming course catalog for enrollment for the 18-19 school year not only has our current requirements, like Lisa just articulated, but also our entrance proficiencies merely as recommendations. They're not requirements. So they're expectations. We would like to see this. This is what we're moving towards. Please be aware that in the future, just so that all the stakeholders, whether it's, as Lisa indicated, parents, students, guidance, administration, whoever happens to be looking at our course catalog will understand that this is where we're moving to. Dana?
We're creating awareness
Yes.
of the work that is coming, that we're doing with our partner schools. And it's not what is being used as strict criteria for determining admission.
It's also getting our public more familiar with the proficiency-based language, which is more familiar to some communities than others. Mount Abe, it's very familiar, and kids are kind of trained to hear that kind of language, and parents understand it. But it may take some education on our part to get our other sending schools on board with hearing that language.
And so just to sort of follow back up on your question, it was mentioned that there's a seat time, 15 credit hours to get in. Individual courses within your description can also have some other requirements. So for example, health has a biology requirement. Jake's class, I believe, has a math requirement. Those in the future will be replaced with, I can do these certain things that are math related, that are science related, but there will be more an I can statement rather than assuming that, okay, you took the class, you have some skills. It's going to then state, okay, you have to have taken a class and you've got these 5 skills that are going to be needed when you come in order for you to progress and be successful and do well.
And I would just add that the purpose of prerequisites, and as we're moving into these entrance proficiencies, the purpose of this is to keep the doors open to as many students as we can while making sure that the students that are in programs are set up for success. You know, we don't want to have a student, say for example, end up in industrial design and fabrication where they're using trigonometry that might only have you know, a 3rd or 4th grade math level. So we want to just try to do justice to making sure we're setting students up to succeed.
Okay. Did you find when you worked with the sending schools that it was kind of an interesting time for you to explain some of the programs that are down here? And was there an awareness from them that, you know, they maybe didn't know all what was going on down here?
Well, I will say this,
Yeah.
and I'm going to speak on a more broad level than your question was. I think one of the challenges that we have as an entity is most people, or too many people, don't have any idea what awesome things are happening here. And I can speak to my own experience. When I first moved up to Vermont from Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia, Philadelphia Eagles have a playoff game this Saturday, just putting in a plug. I just want to let you guys know, I worked for 2 years right up the hall in Middlebury Union High School, and I had no idea what happened here until Kay Doolin put in for her retirement, and I had my contract in hand to turn in for the next year at ACSU, and you know, we just got into a conversation. She mentioned she was retiring, and after talking to her and with the enthusiasm she had, I put the contract in my back pocket and asked Kay if we could talk further. And as it turns out, I ended up getting a tour of the Career Center, and I was floored at what was happening here. And I worked right down the hall and didn't even know. So if I didn't know, what about folks out in the community? So I think that's really one of the challenges, is to somehow bring the awesome things that are happening here out to where more people are aware of it.
Thank you.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to achieve with
Right.
with the open house this year, with that gala presentation, with the Maker Fair, and trying to bring as many constituents as possible in to see what we have to offer, not only the students in 9 through 12, but the greater community as well. So,
Well, I would invite the video crew to come maybe that particular evening and take an opportunity to film some of the activities that are going on.
that would be wonderful.
That would be wonderful.
So PEG TV can certainly join us.
Any other questions for us?
That's great. Kudos.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
everybody.
I keep forgetting that's a touch screen. Giant iPad.
The giant iPad, that's right.
All right, so our next item on the agenda is policy 4.1, governing style. Do we have a volunteer for that? Mike?
Keeping us on the agenda, Jason, very, very good job wrapping us back around when we jumped over onto other places, bringing us back in. Board members engaged tonight. We had corrections, we had nitpicking by me, we had details by the committee members, very engaged, great. Thank you, Gibson, flexibility from staff to take care of that nitpicking that was done. Overall, a really nice, and thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, it was
Where'd they
very
go?
nice.
Thank you guys for coming in.
You're welcome.
But it was well run and stuck to the agenda, so, good
Excellent.
job.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So next item, I need an executive session for personnel.
One question before we go there. Has everyone signed the attendance list? And could I get that back? Great, thank you, sorry. Just didn't want anybody to leave. Thank you.
Why am I surprised you put that up? 68 cents.
All right, so I take a motion. So, all right, it's been moved and it's seconded.
Did you sign this?
Yeah, right there.
Oh,
All right, so
The bills.
when we come out, we won't be taking any action, so.
Thank you for
do we, all those in favor of going into executive session signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. Okay, we'll go into executive session.